We are so happy that you've joined us for this first talk in our two-part lecture series, with this talk being titled, The Catholic Vision of Human Dignity, Its Uniqueness and Importance Today. However, before we continue, I would like to begin this, as we should do all things, in prayer. In particular, I'd like to use the prayer that St. Francis composed for Brother Leo.
Sorry, step out for 1 second.
Housekeeping notes. Neither the speaker nor the planners tonight have any conflicts of interest to declare. Our speaker will give his lecture for about 45 minutes, and afterwards we'll have a short Q&A. There are refreshments available in the back of the room. Finally, if you'd like to support the continued work of the Bioethics lectures through spiritual or financial support, I would be happy to speak to you at your convenience. Friends, it is my great honor to introduce J.D. Flynn as our esteemed lecturer this evening. J.D. is a canonist and a journalist, a husband and a father. He is the co-founder of The Pillar and the former editor-in-chief of Catholic News Agency. He has served as the former chancellor of the Archdiocese of Denver and as a consultant for the USCCB. He received his MA in theology from the Franciscan University of Steubenville and his J.C.L. in canon law from the Catholic University of America in D.C., my alma mater. Among other places, J.D.'s articles have appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Post, First Things, the National Review, and various Catholic publications. Here at FranU, as part of our mission as a Catholic university, we seek to embody those hallmarks of St. Francis's discipleship of Christ: justice, humility, joyfulness of spirit, respect for all life, and service. Indeed, the two topics that J.D. has come to speak to us about dovetail nicely with our celebration of Franciscan Week, since J.D.'s lectures touch the very intersection of all these Franciscan hallmarks. And so, without further ado, I present to you J.D. Flynn, who will be speaking on the Catholic vision of human dignity, its uniqueness and importance today.
Well, hi. Thank you, Dr. Ragusa, very much for having me and for such a kind introduction. I'd like to thank the university for having me. I'd like to thank Dr. Holland for such a very warm welcome. The president of your college, by the way, is a really great lady. You should give her a round of applause right now because she's so nice. And then I'd like to thank all of you for coming, especially you students. I'm sure that extra credit in your theology classes isn't the only reason that you came, but maybe one of them. And I hope that I'll fulfill the extra credit and still be interesting. I pressed some. Oh, did I press? No, that's something else. There's a screen back there with a sign about a gumbo sale, and that sounds amazing, so I got really distracted by that. Please forgive me.
I will.
Thank you. I did press something. The gumbo sale is still back there, though, and honestly, if the gumbo sale were tonight, I would probably be at that and not at this. So we're all probably better off that there's not a competition, because I think all of us would rather be eating gumbo, whatever that is. I live in Colorado and I'm from New Jersey, so I have a sort of very vague idea that gumbo is maybe a soup, and there might be cornbread and shrimp in it. And this lady's nodding her head vigorously, so looks like there's cornbread near it though, is there not? No, there's not. What's that? There can be if you want. Okay, well, you guys are very hospitable. I've made a faux pas with the cornbread thing. Please forgive me. I won't ask for it again. But it would be better with cornbread, right? No, okay. Let's talk about something else, please. I don't know why you guys are on this gumbo thing, but it's time to talk about something else. I am very grateful to all of you for coming, and I'm very honored to be invited to give this lecture. This is a lecture in your bioethics series during Franciscan Week, and I probably have to offer the caveat that I am not in any way whatsoever a sort of bioethicist or a moral theologian or an academic at all, really. I am by training a canon lawyer, which is a kind of a church lawyer, a lawyer who works in the context of the Catholic Church, and I work as a journalist. And as a canon lawyer, I could talk with you about human dignity from the perspective of kind of rights and obligations which are recognized in law and the way in which law has developed to recognize the fullness of the human person and his flourishing in the context of a community. But I suspect you would be bored with that, so I didn't prepare that lecture, and I hope you'll forgive me, Christopher, that what I will offer is not especially academic. Because any real insights that I can offer about human dignity, any real insights that I can offer about the Church's understanding of what it means to be a human person, or the Church's sort of unique understanding, sorry, I'm just going to get my phone for my notes, the Church's unique understanding of what it means to be a human person comes from the great blessing of my own life, the blessings that the Lord has given me in my own life. Chris mentioned that I am a husband and a father, and that's true. Sorry. Chris mentioned that I am a husband and a father. I shouldn't be allowed near things. Chris mentioned that I am a husband and a father, and that's true. And the great gift of my life, especially as it relates to the topic of the Church's the Church's vision of human dignity, the great gift of my life is knowing and loving people, children, my own children, with profound intellectual disabilities. And what I want to talk to you a little bit about tonight is what I've learned as a father, as a husband, as a Christian, but most especially what I've learned as the father of two children with disabilities. I have three children, and I'm going to talk about two of them, but I feel like I should mention right at the beginning that I have three, because when I give talks about disabilities, I always leave off my typical son, Daniel, and then when I come home, he says, "What did you talk about?" And I say, "I talked about your brother and sister," and he looks so sad. So let me start off by saying I have three children, and one of them is named Daniel, and he's great. We can put him over there now. Because I have three children, and two of them are adopted. My son Max is 12, and my son Pia is 11. Both of them have Down syndrome. And my son Max has a host of other sort of neurological difficulties that come from, you guys are, I know many of you sort of health science people, he has a host of neurological difficulties that come from the situation of his own prenatal care, and then some other sort of genetic neurological disabilities as well. I want to tell you about my children, and then I want to tell you some of the things that I've learned about their dignity and about our dignity, and some of the ways that I think that counters much of what we hear about what it even means to be a person, or what it means to be important as a person, or why we're important, or why our humanity matters. What I've learned from my children and how that's different from what we might hear in the world, and then I'll tell you why I think some of that's important for you to hear. My son Max is a beautiful boy. He's 12 years old, I think. See, when my wife's not here, and fathers will understand this, it's a little tricky. He's 12-ish years old. He might be 13, but if my wife were in the front row, she would know with certitude. Anyway, he's in 7th grade. I know that much. And that seems like 12, right? So we'll say 12. My son Max is a beautiful boy. He's 12 years old. He's in 7th grade. And as I say, he suffers from Down syndrome and from a host of other neurological difficulties. He's a great gift. He's a great gift in my life because he made me a father. He came into my life and transformed it. Fatherhood, whether that's practical fatherhood, biological fatherhood, or spiritual fatherhood. I see we have some priests and deacons with us who experience a different kind of fatherhood, a spiritual fatherhood. But whatever that is, fatherhood is a transformative experience. And my son Max made me a father. And so in that sense, I almost can't talk about him without sort of profound gratitude to God for the incredible gift of being a father, of knowing and loving children. We met my son Max when he was 10 days old. He was in the NICU. He was born in, we live in Colorado, and he was born in a town called Greeley, Colorado, which is kind of on the plains of Colorado, far away from the mountains where sort of the rednecks live. So my son Max is a redneck, and there's nothing he can do about that. But we met him when he was 10 days old. in the hospital in the NICU. And when we met him, he was, some of you, again, I know are in nursing or medical sciences. These things are more familiar to you. But I won't forget meeting him. He was about 6 pounds when we met him. He could not hardly breathe on his own. He could not hardly eat on his own. He could not hardly sustain life on his own. He had been born so small and with so many challenges. When we met him, he seemed to be just a very small bundle of a person with a very large sort of cacophony of tubes and wires running out of him, hooked up to machines that I didn't yet understand. Now I understand the machines. Now my children spend a lot of time in the hospital, and when the machines beep annoyingly, I unplug the machines, and then a nurse comes in and yells at me. But back then I didn't know that you could unplug the machines if you wanted to. And I see all these people like, why are you saying that? You can't unplug the machines. You kid, nothing bad will happen. But I didn't know. I saw him just hooked up to all these machines, to all these wires, to all these tubes, just the smallest little thing. He had and still has these beautiful almond eyes. He had just the beginnings of a smile that would become a smile for which he is well known in our family and for which he is well known among his friends, a smile that just traverses across the whole of his face. He has become, from that very, very small bundle, struggling to be alive, he has become a boy of tremendous energy and tremendous interest in the people around him. He loves his siblings, he loves his friends, he loves his family, and a tremendous love for life itself. My son Max is becoming a teenager, so it's not that he greets every morning with the sun, but when he gets up around 10:15 or 11, he greets every day with a great deal of gusto and joy. He loves life. He loves the gift of his own life, and he loves the gift of the people in his life. But my son Max suffers tremendously. Because of the neurological difficulties that he has, in addition to Down syndrome, a lot of things about the world move too quickly for Max. It's very difficult for him to process loud sounds. It's very difficult for him to process bright or fast movements. It's very difficult for him to process new tastes or new textures or things outside of his routine. Max thrives when he knows what to expect because it's the thing that happened yesterday and the day before that and the day before that. But when something is different from that, when something is out of the ordinary, it's a struggle for him. My son Max loves old movies. He loves them. He makes us watch them over and over and over again, and he has a record player, and he makes us go to the library and get the record recordings of old movies, and he sits in his room and he listens to them, and he wants to wear costumes from old movies. And right now, he's in a Chitty Chitty Bang Bang phase. I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen the movie Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. This lady's seen it. You're awesome. I like this lady. She knows about gumbo, and she knows Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. But he's in a Chitty Chitty Bang Bang phase, and he wants very much to be all of the characters from Chitty Chitty Bang Bang. And so he draws out these costumes that he wants, elaborate costumes. The costumes in this movie are not simple. He draws out these elaborate costumes, and then he brings them to us, and he says, Max, can I have this? And so we have to sort of figure out how to provide these costumes for him, and he hopes and he hopes and he hopes, and then he puts them on, and if the texture is the wrong thing, if it's a little itchier than he thought it would be, or if the sleeves are a little bit longer than he thought they would be, or if the pants drag on the floor, he can't handle it. He crouches down, he sits on the floor. His day is ruined. When things are not how Max expects them to be, or the way that he hopes they will be, it's too much for him. And that's not his fault. That's not a moral failing. That's not sort of Max being cranky or particular or fussy. That's my son Max having a very sort of limited sense of how to engage with the world, full of hope about what the world will be, and a very difficult time processing what will happen if it's not that. He's a great gift. I said it before and I'll say it again. He loves his siblings. He loves his friends. He loves babies. He could sit and hold a baby all day long. He has an idea that maybe he could be a babysitter. And so he'll tell us sometimes when there's a baby, he'll tell us, Dad, Max babysitter, right? And so, but what Max thinks that means is not that he'll stay with the baby while everyone else goes. In fact, if everyone else goes, he'd be dismayed. What he thinks it means is that he can hold the baby and then sit down and stay there for as long as possible. He just wants to sit with the baby. And that's a great gift for him. He has a tenderness, and he evokes tenderness in other people. He makes other people's hearts bigger than they think they are. He gives other people the gift of compassion and engagement and joy. and he really loves his little sister Pia. My daughter Pia is 51 weeks younger than Max. She is also adopted. She also has Down syndrome. We met Pia on the day she was born. We found out about her just a couple of days before she was born. We had just adopted this other baby. We weren't planning to adopt another baby. And then our adoption agency called us. It was a Thursday. I won't forget, our adoption agency called us on a Thursday, and they said, a woman came into our agency today, and she's going to have a baby soon, and the baby has Down syndrome, and she wants a family who already knows a lot about Down syndrome and practices the Catholic faith. And do you know anybody? And we did. We knew us. And so we told them that we knew us, and we prayed about it a little bit, and we talked about it a little bit, and we weren't sure quite what we would be jumping into, but we thought that when God offers you the gift of life, you take it. And so we said yes, and so we met our daughter just 3 days later on the day she was born in a hospital in a much nicer part of Colorado than Greeley. She's a pretty cool girl. And we just loved her from the day she was born. She's Vietnamese, my daughter. She was born in America, but her birth parents are Vietnamese. And she has this beautiful skin and beautiful dark hair and an incredible smile. We took her home, and we had these 2 babies, and we just wondered what our life would be like. And then 5 days after we took my daughter home, we took her to the doctor. You guys probably know this, but when you have a new baby, you take them to the doctor on the fifth day. It's called the 5-day checkup, and they listen to the baby's heart. And if the baby has a neurological difficulty or anything else like that, they might take some of the baby's blood. And so they took some of Pia's blood, and we didn't think anything of it, and we went home, and we got a call a few hours later that we needed to rush Pia to the hospital, to the children's hospital near our house. And we needed to rush her to the hospital because we needed to take her to the oncology wing. Pia had a kind of cancer, a liquid tumor called transient myeloproliferative disorder, which only people with Down syndrome can get. So if you haven't heard of it in your textbook, I wouldn't be surprised, but only people with Down syndrome can get. And there are sort of 2 options for transient myeloproliferative disorder. There's no real treatment for it. Either you outgrow it or you don't. And when we took her to the hospital, we found ourselves asking the question that parents ask when their children are diagnosed with cancer at 5 days old. God, why did you give us this baby just to put her life in risk in this way? God, why would she suffer this way? Why would you allow her to suffer this way? I think we got answers to that question, and I want to talk a lot about suffering later. But first I want to just tell you about the providence of God in my daughter Pia's life, because today is the Feast of the Guardian Angels, and I think my daughter Pia has a whole fleet of them, I don't know what the word is for a lot of something in like an army. What is that, like a battalion of them? Thank you, that's a word. A whole battalion of them. I think my daughter Pia has a whole battalion of guardian angels, and here's why I knew that right away. We took her to the hospital because we needed to check her into the oncology wing. She had transient myeloproliferative disorder. We didn't know what would happen. That night, the night in which we were agonizing over why my daughter was in the hospital, why God had allowed our daughter to have to leave our home and to have to go and be in this cold hospital bed so soon after she was born. That night she had 2 heart attacks. And if she had been at home, they weren't related to the cancer. They were just because she had the kind of cardiac problems that children with Down syndrome have. But if she had been at home, there's no way that we would have known, perhaps, that she had the heart attacks. We would have been sleeping. She would have been sleeping in a bassinet next to our bed. If we had known, I doubt there's any way we would have gotten her to the hospital. I doubt there's any way that doctors would have rushed in. I doubt there's any way that her life would have been saved. But God saved my daughter Pia's life that day. In the mystery of God's providence, in the mystery of suffering and goodness, sort of all intertwined with one another in a way that I can't understand, but I can say with certitude, I can say that my daughter was in that hospital suffering, and God used that suffering for her life to be spared. It was an incredible gift to our family, and she is an incredible gift to our family. My daughter Pia is the funniest person that I know. And I'm going to tell you something about your parents. A lot of parents say that their kids are funny because they're being polite, but their kids actually aren't that funny. My daughter Pia is genuinely funny. She's funnier than you are, I promise you that. She's a great mimic, and she has a great source of jokes. I'll tell you a Pia joke that she told me just 2 days ago. Why can't you give Elsa a balloon? Because she'll let it go. Right? That's super funny that's super funny, you guys. Anyway, my daughter Pia, I think she's the funniest person I know. Now you guys are not so sure, but should have heard her tell it. My daughter Pia is the funniest person I know. She is inquisitive. She is competitive, fiercely competitive. She loves basketball. She loves wrestling. She loves plays. She's always sort of writing and crafting little plays. She loves her siblings. She loves her family. She loves her friends. She loves learning how to write, and she loves learning how to read, and she'll often go up to her room and say that she's doing her work, which means that she hand copies books into these notebooks. And so we have all these notebooks that are just filled with, stories from other books. But she also loves her friends so much. And when you're a middle school girl, you sort of write notes. Well, I don't know, but I'm told that middle school girls sort of write notes to their friends, and pass them along, and they love the sort of doing that sort of thing. And Pia likes that too in her own way. She really wants to show her friends that she loves her. So she'll write their name in a notebook, 15 times on a piece of paper, and then she'll give it to them. But she practices at home, which means that my daughter Pia's room is really weird. The walls are covered with the names of her friends because she just write them in markers to practice and practice and practice so she can put them on a paper and then give it to her friends. But I always wonder what will happen if a policeman comes to our house and just goes into this room full of the names of little girls. Like, what on earth will happen then, I wonder. Anyway, Pia doesn't worry about that at all, but I do. She's a great gift to us, and we're very blessed to have her in our lives. She was in the hospital for transient myeloproliferative disorder. As you can tell, I can hardly pronounce that. God spared her life. She recovered from that cancer. And then on her first birthday, she wasn't feeling very well. And my wife noticed that she had some spots on her face. And so she took her to the doctor. And she had a different kind of cancer, we learned that day. She had a kind of leukemia, AML, and we took her back to the oncology wing, and she spent a year undergoing chemo, round after round of chemo. And chemo, if you've loved anyone who undergoes chemotherapy, chemo is a roller coaster. You blast the body with these chemicals. The chemicals make the body very, very sick and very, very weak. The person gets very, very close to meeting their mortality. Then you wait for them to get a little bit better, and you do it again. And then you do it again, and you do it again. And if your child has suffered that, the heartbreak, the agony of that roller coaster. Every single month, that period between one round of chemo and the next, when your child's white blood counts are in the single digits, and you can't have anyone around them who has sneezed ever in their life. And all you can do when you're near them is wash their hands. You can't wash your hands. You have to be so careful about everything because of how very weak and how very vulnerable they are. It's a roller coaster of emotions. It's a roller coaster of honest to God mortality, and it's a roller coaster of faith. And so Pia recovered. She's become one of the strongest people that I know. She's kind of covered with all of these little scars from her various cancer treatments, from where she had lines going in, and then she pulled a line out, and then she had to get a line going in somewhere else, and where she had injections or where she had surgeries and these kinds of things. She's got lots of scars, but she likes sparkly things, and so she paints them with sparkly nail polish and goes to the pool, moves on with her life. She doesn't think very much about it. But I think those scars are just a kind of record of the suffering that she's endured. And I think there's something beautiful and redemptive when she paints them with nail polish or covers them in lipstick or colors them once with a Sharpie, which didn't come out for several weeks. Whatever it is, I think there's something beautiful and redemptive and victorious, almost a claiming of victory in that. I tell you about my children because when I look at them, as I have gotten to know them, they have given me the gift that all children give their parents. They have given me the gift of tremendous pride. I'm proud of my children. They have given me the gift of profound affection. I love them. I love to spend time with them. They have given me the gift of real joy. But I know that when the world sees my children, there are many people who see them very differently, right? There are many people who see my children, the sort of sum total of my children, as a diagnosis, as a collection of things which they can't do, as a sort of sum total of incapacities and inabilities and limitations. And I know that there are people who think that children like mine and the kind of suffering they experience is a life that's not worth living. You know that too. You know that there are ethicists and medical professionals and politicians and leaders who would say that a life of suffering, and by which they mean a life like my children's, is a life that's incompatible with life itself. And I want to tell you a little bit about why I think that's not true. Or I want to tell you a little bit about what I've learned about human dignity, at least from these guys. The first thing that I think I've learned from my children about human dignity is that our dignity comes not from what we can do, but from who we are. Our dignity comes not from what we can do, but from who we are. There's a lie that I think underpins a lot of our culture, that I think many of us probably tell about ourselves, that goes back hundreds of years, that we as human beings can become masters of the universe, that we as human beings are strong enough and smart enough and capable enough to conquer nature itself, to conquer our own mortality, to conquer our own limitations, that we as human beings are strong enough to sort of tame our suffering, tame our diseases, tame our terrible inclinations, that we can be good enough and smart enough and successful enough to attain something called happiness. And that happiness is found at the end of a road of strength and goodness and independence and capacity and production. There's a lie that says that our dignity comes from what we can do, that our worth comes from what we can contribute to society, the sort of sum total of human happiness. There's a lie that says that being a person, being fulfilled as being a person, means exactly that, contributing to some greater good than ourselves. But what I've learned from my children is that our worth doesn't come from that. Our worth doesn't come from the idea that we can be particularly strong or particularly smart or particularly capable or particularly successful or contribute to anything, to some grand noble project in some particular way. That those things are great if we can do them. But our dignity comes from the fact that we're made in the image and likeness of God and from the fact that we're beloved by God the Father. Our dignity comes from the fact that it is merely good that we exist. And we can know that it's good that we exist because God has said that it's good that we exist. That our existence is a reflection of God's goodness and God's creative capacity and God's love. And I don't just know this because I see this in my children. I don't just know this because my children aren't earning very much money for our family, which I would like them to be, but my children aren't earning us very much money for our family, and I sort of like them anyway. I see this because of the way I see my children treat other people. My children love their friends. My children love going to school. My children love the peers that they have. They're extremely blessed at our parish school. They wake up every morning, and especially my daughter wakes up at about 5:15 to put on her school uniform, and then she sits by the door while the rest of us sort of wake up at 7:30 and come downstairs and swear a little bit and have a small argument and drink some coffee and then put our kids in the car and go to school. She's up for hours before any of that, putting on her uniform, writing names in her notebook, waiting by the door, because she loves the joy of friendship that she's been given. She loves her peers. She loves her companions. But what I find interesting, I watched my daughter. I went with her on the 6th grade retreat a couple of weeks ago. And what I find interesting is that my daughter doesn't just like the kids who are nice to her. There are kids who are nice to her. There are girls who dote on her. There are girls who want to spend every minute with her. There are girls who like to braid her hair and who like to sort of dress her up and who like to sort of spend a lot of time with her. And then there are kids who just really don't pay very much attention to her at all. There are kids who would rather do other things. There are boys who would rather play soccer than let my daughter paint their fingernails, and I don't blame them for that. And there are boys in 6th grade, as you can imagine, who would rather sort of ditch the 6th grade retreat and head off into the woods and throw rocks at a cat than they shouldn't throw rocks at a cat. I'm not saying that's good, lady. I'm just saying that's what they like to do. Jeez, what do you take me for? Who would like to ditch the 6th grade retreat and head out into the woods and throw rocks at a larger rock, let's say, instead of being on the 6th grade retreat. And what I notice about my daughter is she's completely undiscriminating in her love for her peers. She doesn't just love the kids who love her. She delights in being present with all of them. And I'll ask her for a list of her friends, and she'll tell me about the kids that she spends time with. But she's just as likely to say the kids who are on the edge of the class, the kids who are getting in trouble, the kids who never have their homework, the kids who are a mess, the kids who, are just sort of way out there. She's just as likely to say that they're her best friends as the girls who spend every minute telling her how cute she is and doting on her and telling jokes with her. And the reason is because I think she sees some goodness in them that I would like to see. I think she sees that it's good that they exist. I think she sees that it's good that they exist because they're a reflection of the image and likeness of God, and that that's not dependent on what they do or what they do for her or how they make her feel or whether they're willing to like go get her a juice box. Because my daughter's a trickster, and so when it's time to go get a juice box or a snack or something like that, she'll pretend that she doesn't remember where they are so that the girls who dote on her will go and get them for her and bring them back so that she can keep sitting where she's sitting. But she doesn't sort of depend her assessment of people on what they're willing to do for her. She's happy to sit with anybody in the class. She's happy to talk with anybody in the class. She's happy to write anybody's name in her notebook. She sees a goodness in her peers just because they're there. And I think we can let so many things get in the way of that. We can let our vision of other people be so sort of crippled by the idea that the people we should desire to spend time with, the people we should esteem the most, the people we should value the most, are the ones who are the most successful, or the funniest, or the cleverest, or the best looking, or the ones who are most willing to do things for us. And all of that can obscure the most profound truth of the Catholic vision of a human person, which is that each of us is made in the image and likeness of God, that each of our existence is a reflection of the love of God, that each of us is held into existence by the thought of God. I know there are philosophers here, and maybe they'll kind of quibble with precisely the way I said that, but you know what I mean. Each of us is held in existence by the love of God. That's the foundation of the Catholic vision of the human person, that our dignity comes from being made by God and being made in His image and likeness. And I've learned that not only from my children, but from the way that they regard other people. So what's the next thing? The next thing that I've kind of learned that I thought I might mention is that we're made for something more than ourselves. We're made for interdependence with each other. We have a kind of illusion in America that the ideal person is the most independent person. I live in Colorado, right? And so we sort of have a lot of cowboy myths about sort of the self-made man and the kind of person who pulls himself up by his bootstraps. And I listen to the priests of our diocese talk, and they talk about the priests of yesteryear, the ones who would sort of get on a mule and ride out through a snowstorm to some mountain town to offer mass and baptize some babies and come back, and how those guys and their sort of rugged independence was the paradigm of what they hoped to be like. Now, the priests of today, get in their Chevy Cavalier and drive out to the mountains instead of getting on a mule, but they're still doing it. But we have the myths that we tell in our church, outside of our church, the myths that we tell about America are so often about this idea of sort of rugged, self-made independence. When we talk about somebody who's a successful politician or a successful business leader, the thing we're most apt to say is how impressive it is that they're a self-made man. What I've learned from my children is that aspiring to a kind of rugged individualism, a kind of rugged and self-made independence, is probably a recipe for unhappiness. Because what we're really made for is not rugged, individual, self-sustaining independence. What we're really made for is interdependence with each other. If we're created in the image and likeness of God, we're created in the image and likeness of a communion of persons. God is a Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so we're created for communion with each other. We're created for intimate and profound and serious communion with each other. We're created to thrive and flourish in relationship with each other, depending on each other, supporting each other. And it's hard for us, I think. Sometimes we very much want to think about even our own dignity as I can do it by myself, right? My dignity, if I'm dignified, if I'm strong, if I'm capable, it means I don't need anybody else's help. Let me tell you what I've learned from my kids about that. My son Max wanted to play baseball this year. He wanted to play baseball because he likes watching baseball on TV. He wanted to play baseball because he watches the other middle school boys play baseball after school. He wanted to play baseball because he wanted to be a part of a team. We signed up for baseball. I really wasn't sure what to expect. I didn't want to play middle school baseball, but if Max was going to play, it meant I was going to play too. So Max got a mitt and I got a mitt. Max got a uniform. I didn't get a uniform. I was a little bit angry at the school about that, but they did not supply me with a middle school baseball uniform. But we went out for baseball practice, and Max watched. He's a watcher. He likes to sort of take things in before he tries them. He watched his friends, his peers. They welcomed him. They were so glad that he was there. We sat on the third base line, and I remember we watched the boys play catch. We watched them take batting practice. We watched them shag fly balls. And I watched how much my son wanted to be a part of that, how much he wanted to do what they were doing. But I told you that the world moves too fast for him, and I meant it. He wanted to do those things, but he couldn't. And it wasn't very long into baseball practice that he realized that. I remember the coach was sort of trying to figure out what it meant to integrate Max on the team, and so he wrote down the batting order for batting practice, and he put Max towards the middle of batting practice. And I told the coach, we're going to go last because we want to watch. So Maxie watched everybody go up to bat, and he watched them take their hits, and he picked up a bat, and he marched over, and he watched, and the coach kind of came close, and he tossed the ball, and he tossed the ball pretty slow, but it was way too much for Max. He took a step back, and he looked at me, and he said, "Dad, help." He asked me to come over. I put my hands around his hands, and we swung. The coach pitched the ball again. We swung the ball. We missed. And the coach pitched the ball again, and we swung the ball, and we missed. And we swung the ball, and we missed. And it reminded me of my own Little League career at that point, to be perfectly honest. So I don't know if Max was humiliated, but I was pretty used to this. Coach swung the ball, and we missed. Finally, on our 9th or 10th pitch, the coach threw the ball, and we swung, and we made contact. And Max knew that he was supposed to run, and his whole team was so happy, and the boys were shouting, "Max, run to first base! Max, run, 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 run!" But he looked at the distance to first base, and he wasn't sure if he would make it. And he put his hand up, and he said, "Dad, help." So we went to first base together. We stood there on first base, and he held my hand, and another boy hit, and we ran to second base. And everything that Max did that day, everything that he wanted to do, he had to have the humility to say, "Dad, help." Every single thing my son wants to do in his life, he has to have the humility to say, "Dad, help." While he watches his peers toss the ball, he can't do it on his own. He has to accept that. He has to look at me. He has to say, "Dad, me too." When he wants a snack, I watch this at home. I'll watch my younger son, Daniel, he's 7. He's great. Please tell him that I talked about him a lot. I'll watch my younger son, Daniel, he's 7, go into the kitchen, when he thinks I'm not paying attention, and climb up on the counter and open the cabinet where the Oreos are on the top shelf and reach way up and knock over a little bowl and hope that I didn't hear it and reach way up and get an Oreo and get it down and then go up to his room and eat the Oreo. And I'm glad for him, right? A 7-year-old should be able to sneak an Oreo out of the kitchen and have some fun with that, right? And I watch Max and Pia watch that. I watch my son and daughter watch that. And I think that every single time they want an Oreo or a chip or an apple, let's pretend that we give them fruit, or an apple, every single time they want something from the kitchen, they have to come and they have to bring it to me because they can't open it. Whatever it is, they can't open it. They lack the dexterity. They lack the strength to open it. And so every single thing, they have to say, "Dad, help." And you'd think this would be a burden, right? I mean, it sounds like a burden. Maybe I'm even describing it as a burden. But it has been their need for me, their need for my wife, their need for their brother, who's younger than them, has become a profound invitation to intimacy in our family. Their needs, expressed in humility, become an invitation for real friendship, right? Because what do I get? Every single time my kid comes to me and says, "Dad, help," because they want to play with this, or because they want to open a package of colored pencils, or because they have the idea that they would sneak an Oreo and they're not quite sure how to execute it, or every single time we go out to baseball practice together, I get to sit down with my son and daughter and share in the thing which gives them delight. It's an incredible gift to be invited into their life in that way. And if we're made for community with each other, if we're made for real intimacy with each other, if we're made in the model of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, in the image of Father, Son, Holy Spirit, God wants that kind of communion for us. Every single time my son says to me, "Dad, help," or my daughter says to me, "Dad, help," not only do I get this moment of unity with them, not only do I get this moment of sharing in their life, not only do I get this moment of profound friendship with them, but I'm reminded of what God wants for me, right? Because I would much rather spend most of my time thinking that I'm independent enough and strong enough and capable enough, thinking that I don't need anyone else, thinking that I can be a rugged individual. But my own life is enriched. I'm happier. I find this thing called joy if when I approach the things in my own life I look at the Father and I say, Father, help. I can't do this on my own. I don't have the capacity to do this on my own. And then what am I inviting? I'm inviting God to come into my life in a profound way. I'm inviting God to sit with me in the same way that I sit with my son on the floor, to open something or to tackle something or to try something or to learn something new, right? That kind of communion with each other is the best kind of human flourishing, is the best kind of human joy. And I learn from the vulnerability of my children that our own vulnerabilities, our own weaknesses, shared with one another, can become the locus for the truest kind of friendship. Okay, so what's next? The next one is about suffering. We're afraid of suffering. We have a profound cultural aversion to suffering. We do not like to suffer. Entire industries are built on the premise that suffering is bad and suffering is avoidable, and that if we can spend enough money or take enough vitamins, I should take some vitamins, but if we can spend enough money or take enough supplements or find the right solution, we can avoid suffering. We're afraid of it. And we're so afraid of suffering, we've come to believe and to tell ourselves that suffering is a moral evil that should be avoided, that we have a duty to avoid suffering. But I've learned from my children just the opposite. I've learned that suffering, rightly appreciated, is a gift. That doesn't mean that we should seek suffering out, or need to seek suffering out, right? That doesn't mean that we should sort of weirdly and sadistically take pleasure in suffering, but it means that suffering is a part of the human experience, a real and true part of the human experience of what it means to be a person. And if we can come to understand that suffering is part of what it means to be a person, we can suffer well, we can suffer with others well, and we can find meaning in our suffering. The year my daughter Pia spent in the hospital with undergoing chemotherapy, I told you it was an up and down. It was an emotional roller coaster. It was a spiritual roller coaster. It was a profoundly challenging time for us. And I remember watching my daughter, as she'd undergo each round of chemotherapy, go from, she was a baby, she was 1 to 2 was the time she spent there. I'd remember watching her go from bouncy and happy and playful and joyful at the beginning of each round to listless and pale and frail and sick at the end of each round. And it was a kind of agony. It would be a kind of agony for any parent, for any friend. And yet, at the same time that my daughter's suffering was a kind of agony, it was also an invitation. It was an invitation for the thing which gives our lives the most meaning. It was an invitation to depend most profoundly on the Lord. The time of my daughter's suffering, I look back now and I realize there was a kind of simplicity in our life to that kind of time. There was a kind of clarity about what matters. That's one of the things that suffering gives us, is a kind of clarity about what matters. A clarity about who we are, a clarity about what our values are, a clarity about what relationships matter to us, and a clarity about what matters about us. And most especially, a clarity about the fact that who is present with us most especially in our suffering is God the Father. That our suffering is actually an opportunity to grow closer and closer to God the Father with each moment that we suffer, with each little thing that we suffer, that we're invited, John Paul II says, to share in the profound gift of Christ's suffering on the cross. The idea that our dignity makes suffering something sort of inimical to human flourishing is something which robs us of the richest experiences of our humanity. The idea that suffering is something that we should be afraid of, that's something that should be avoided at all costs, something which we should assist people in avoiding even in immoral ways, is not only an idea that breeds a great deal of kind of immoral thinking, but it's also an idea which just cheapens our human experience. Because our suffering is the place where we most profoundly can find the meaning of what it is to be a person. And when we share in someone's suffering, we can find most profoundly our own capacity for love. I was reminded of this summer. My son Max, some of you asked me about this, which I'm very grateful for, but my son Max got pneumonia this summer, and he was prescribed antibiotics, which should have been fine, but he was prescribed the wrong kind of antibiotics for the kind of pneumonia that he had, and so while he was undergoing a course of pneumonia antibiotics, he got sicker instead of healthier. And so he spent about 2 weeks or 10 days or whatever it was on the antibiotics, and we kind of were thinking that he'd get better, but he just got sicker and sicker and sicker until he was really just a wisp. We were on vacation, and the entirety of his vacation was sleeping in our hotel room in Myrtle Beach, and then my wife and I sort of taking turns taking the other kids to the beach. And actually that was fine because that meant each of us only had to spend a little bit of time at the beach with kids kicking sand in our face, and then the rest of the time watching TV while with a sleeping kid next to us, And so we were playing this game where we were pretending to be really selfless. I'd be like, no, you take the kids to the beach today. I'll stay with Max. My wife would be like, I couldn't possibly take that away from you. You go to the beach with the kids. I don't mind staying here, And so we were playing this passive-aggressive game because we both wanted to watch TV. But my son Max, while we were watching TV or taking the kids to the beach, my son Max was getting sicker and sicker. When we came home from our vacation, he was still sick. And a couple days after that, he was lying on the couch and he just couldn't breathe. He was just struggling to take a breath, and suddenly his struggling was very pronounced. He just couldn't get a breath, and it was turning paler than he already was, and we rushed him to the hospital, and he was in respiratory failure, and so they had to put him on a ventilator right away, and then he spent the better part of 2 weeks, in the hospital, the first part on the ventilator, and the second part after that. And Max is old enough now that he's able to begin to understand the meaning of his suffering, and he's even able to understand that he suffers a little bit more than some people do. And so while he suffered on the ventilator and then after the ventilator, a priest friend of ours brought a little crucifix. Max held the little crucifix in his hands, and then we named the people that we wanted to pray for. We'd sit in the hospital, and I'd say the name of someone in our family or some friend of ours, and Max would nod, and we'd say a Hail Mary for them. Or sometimes, this was a little bit confusing to me, I'd say the name of someone in our family, and he'd shake his head vigorously that we weren't going to pray for them. But I did anyway, because I was worried that it was weird if we didn't. But we just sat and we offered up for days. We just sat and we offered up in union with Christ who suffered on the cross for us, the suffering of this little kid on a ventilator, the suffering of this little sickness, of this scare. We were really worried when we brought him to the hospital. We just offered that to Christ, one Hail Mary at a time. And it occurred to me as we were doing that suffering is something that all of us can do. Suffering is the thing that all of us can do, that is the thing that Jesus did, right? That Jesus did the thing that every single human being experiences. Because suffering isn't only the thing that we can do. Suffering is the thing that each of us has done and will do. Each of us experiences pain. Each of us experiences mortality. Each of us experiences loss. None of us is exempt from those things. And I thought what a gift it is that Jesus took this thing that all of us experience, and that all of us experience ruefully, that none of us wish for, and he made it the means by which he expressed his most perfect love for us, because that means all of us can join into that. Every single one of us, by what Blaise Pascal calls the dignity of causality, can enter into the suffering of Jesus Christ just by bearing our own suffering well, by offering our suffering in union with the cross, by joining Jesus in his suffering, and by using it to pray for other people. All of us can experience suffering not as a depravity, but as an opportunity for love, as a gift, and especially as a way to be unified with God. So why is this important? Why am I telling you any of this? This is important, I think, because the vision of the human person that we hear these days, the vision of the human person that is advancing ever more in our society, is one that wants to rob us of the richest parts of being a human person. I read an article today, many of you have read about it as well, about a woman, an American woman, who was one of the first people to die in a 3D printed nitrogen gas chamber, a suicide machine. And these are becoming very common in Switzerland. They will become common in other countries. There is a burgeoning Swiss industry of suicide tourism, of people facing terminal illnesses or non-terminal illnesses, people facing mental health challenges, who have come to believe that suffering is so much something to be avoided that taking their own lives is a preferable alternative. And there are people who believe that suffering is so much of an evil to be avoided that they should use the technology that they're able to develop and their skills and gifts as medical professionals to assist in taking people's lives. All of you have likely read about the profusion of assisted suicide in Canada, our neighbor to the north, the degree to which medically assisted suicide has become, medical aid in dying it's called, has become widely recommended for people who are suffering terminal illnesses, but for people who are also suffering mental health crises, for people who are suffering PTSD, the effects of war, and increasingly for people who seem to be suffering socioeconomic crosses, for people who seem to be suffering the synthesis of mental health crisis and poverty, which many people seem to find especially galling. The idea that we should avoid suffering has so taken root in our society that people are being encouraged to avoid suffering by taking their own lives, by causing more suffering among those around them, and by depriving themselves of the gift of their own life. That's not like dystopian fiction. That's now. That's real in the culture in which we live. At the same time, it is increasingly the case that human dignity is measured according to our productive capacity, that resources are allocated according to our human capacity. We are entering into an era of technologically assisted eugenics on many fronts. At the same time that you hear about medical assistance in dying, you will hear about more and more physicians and politicians who say that the most merciful thing they can do for a society is to eradicate children like mine because of the suffering they will experience and because of their limited ability to contribute to the economic health of our country, or because of the acute way in which they will cause economic and social distress for their families. We should assist people. We're Catholics. We should assist people in economic and social distress. We should most especially assist people whose economic and social distress is caused by their compassionate care for the most vulnerable in our society. But the means of that assistance is not death. And we are increasingly entering into a society in which death is proffered as a reasonable way to avoid suffering or economic distress or social discomfort. And so what you're doing at this college is really, really important. Because this college, Franciscan missionaries, I always get it wrong. This college, could you put your arms down for a second so I can read the name of your college on your shirt? Franciscan Missionaries of Our Lady University. This college is a beautiful and important thing, precisely because of its focus on health sciences, coupled with a genuine commitment to a Catholic vision of the human person. Learning how to engage with the world at points of suffering and points of vulnerability, learning how to engage with people at their most distressing times while recognizing that it is good that they are alive simply because their life is a gift, is a rarity, and will become increasingly important, increasingly countercultural, and increasingly prophetic. You're really important because God made you. And the things that you're learning here are really important because they're the best hope of survival for children like mine, for people who are suffering mental illnesses, for people who are suffering from a combination of mental illness and poverty. You're really important because the things that you're learning here are the best line of defense for the gift of life. St. Francis of Assisi, whose week we're celebrating now, had the gift of seeing people. He told his brothers all the time that their mission was to see people through the Eucharist. In other words, to see people through the person of Christ, to look at other people and to see Christ. When you celebrate Franciscan Week, the celebration is the call to see one another as Jesus Christ himself. And each of you and the things that you're doing here are so important because of the ways in which you can see the dignity of other people, in which you can see the value of their life, in which you can see their lives as a gift, and in which you can help to stand up for those things, to celebrate them, and to protect and defend them. So thank you for that, and thank you for having me, and thank you for letting me share a little about my family.
Thank you.
Here's Batman.
Yeah, Batman. Thank you to JD again. We have an opportunity for some question and answer. So if you have questions about Max
or Daniel. Boy, you'd do me a real favor if you asked me a question about that guy.
I will run a microphone to you.
Tomorrow, the talk that I'm going to give is about how people with disabilities can help us to build what Pope Francis calls a civilization of love. So if you're interested in some more practical stuff, that's what I'll talk about then. Yes, ma'am.
I think I'm loud enough. I don't really need the microphone, but
I don't think you do either.